Factories have their own type of dawn, a stained, brassy light that pours down glassless windows, splintering itself over chipped concrete and the oily shadows under loading racks. At that hour, the morning shift lurches to life not with hope, but with resigned inertia. Faces swollen with sleep, boots grinding grit, steam from battered thermoses mixing with cigarette smoke. Sometimes I remember those mornings as almost beautiful, a suspended misery cloaked in silence. But the day I was dismissed, beauty was miles away. My memories begin with the taste of rust from a split lip, from biting down too tightly to keep from shouting. Our foreman, Beppe, stood by the punch card machine, stubby hands crossed over his stomach. "Manca lavoro," he said. "We have no more work for you." He didn't bother pretending. There was a smoke tucked in the folds of his jaw, as if he relished this. Behind him, sunlight the color of old coins glinted off the steel press. My hands, still stained with the night's grease, curled on themselves. Around me, men a decade older. Rocco, whose knuckles were thick from wrenching clogged machines. Mario, with his cough that scraped his throat raw. Mumbled condolences no one believed. Beppe didn't care. He tapped the clipboard. "You write too much, Filippo. Not enough working, too much scribbling. Forget useless dreams. You think you're going to be the next Montanelli? Huh!" That laughter, the sneer and shuffle, echoed in the cavernous hall, bouncing higher than the sparks jumping from the cutting torch. I left with my time card and a severance envelope as thin as a wafer. My boots scuffed the dust. They let me keep the battered notebook from my locker. Merciful or indifferent, I don't know. We lived in a neighborhood outside Rome's ring road, Balduina, cheap enough for workers, but close enough to the basilicas that the church bells still marked time. My mother, bones sharp from decades upright and a textile loom, met me by our tin mailbox. She sniffed, arms crossed. Her forehead was always pinched where the kerchief pressed. "See, just like your father, dreamers do not eat," she muttered. She took the envelope, weighing its promise. What now? Who will pay? My little brother peered out from behind her, hopeful and afraid. He was 12 then, clever, but too quick to echo others' opinions. Dinner that night was silent cabbage boiled into oblivion, bread hard enough to nick the tongue. We ate with bent heads, until my Uncle Piero barged in after vespers, cheeks flushed from cheap wine. "Filippo, sacked, eh?" He thumped the table hard enough to rattle the cutlery. "Maybe now he will forget this stupidity. Investigative journalist, what is this, a movie? Listen to your elders. Rome is not for dreamers." He jabbed his chest for emphasis, spraying breadcrumbs. My mother said nothing, but her silence hardened, a wall I could not climb. The rest of the family nodded, unified by their conviction that suffering must be virtuous, and that happiness is only for fools. Everywhere, this refrain, why not fix cars? Why not fill resumes with honest labor? Why choose disgrace? The days that followed unraveled slowly. I searched for work mornings. I waited outside construction sites. Afternoons, I trailed after cleaning crews. But at night, I scribbled furiously on cheap notepads, copying articles from La Repubblica, dissecting every inverted pyramid, every sharp tremor of truth. I wrote about the men who loaded crates of spoiled fruit at the Testaccio market for pennies, about the battered sex workers behind Termini, stationed silently under sodium lights. I wrote columns that no one wanted, opinion pieces too full of anger for the conservative dailies. My uncle found a rumpled sheet once, an exposé draft about a garbage company laundering money through municipal contracts. He laughed until he coughed. "You? The mafia will kill you for 1 lira. Learn to vanish. You will never be published." The rage flared and faded, replaced, most days, by a brittle kind of defiance. My brother would linger in my doorway while I scrawled by lamplight. "They're wrong," he would say, lips pressed together. But belief is not contagious, and hope is not fuel. Years passed like this, dead ends lined up like gravestones, the jobs that fell through, the polite rejections couched in legalese, the debts creeping up our hallway. When I left, finally, it was not in triumph, but in resignation. A friend of a friend, Renato, bought my best notes for scrap at a small Roman weekly, enough for bus fare and a week's groceries. Milan was where I ran, its angles sharper, its sky bright with opportunity, or perhaps just colder than Rome's forgiving haze. I lived in a boarding house run by a retired opera singer. In exchange for rent, I painted her shutters and filed her shoes. But within weeks I found a stringer's work following leads no one else wanted. Illegal pigeon racing, counterfeit cigarettes, abandoned tenements shielded from police reports. It was not glamorous. I ate day-old focaccia, drank tap water, wore clothes sewn from remnants. Still, the first time my byline appeared, in the smallest block letters beside a blurb about city council fraud, I carried that paper like a talisman. I called home. No one answered. Those first months, the consolation was simple. No one in Milan knew how thoroughly I'd been mocked. Here, I was not the factory boy with impossible ambitions. I was just another hustler shaping the world into copy. But recognition is not a straight path. Half my stories disappeared into editorial baskets. Money dripped in slowly, unpredictable as the rain that battered the tin roof above my mattress. Slights from home arrived in letters. "Are you eating enough? Will you ever have real stability?" One evening, in a small trattoria, I spotted a notice tacked over the coffee machine. "Whistleblowers needed. City corruption initiative. Contact Emilio for discreet assistance." I called. The next weeks blurred into a fever. Clandestine meetings, brown envelopes exchanged in parking garages, phones with numbers masked. An elderly city clerk provided ledgers hinting at a bribery ring that reached into the highest municipal offices. Blood thrummed in my ears, a constant surge of fear and focus. I submitted drafts to national papers. At first, editors passed. Too risky or too speculative. One finally relented, coaxed by my persistence and a stack of source tapes. "If you're wrong," he warned, "your career is over in 1 week. If you're right," he didn't finish. For months, my world shrank to a single purpose. I traced unmarked bills, tracked shell companies, followed men in expensive suits down shadowed arcades. I ate on my feet, ran through rain, and found sleep only at dawn. Publishing day, I waited in a corner coffee bar, stirring sugar into cup after cup. When the paper hit the streets, my name was third on the byline. But the phones started ringing immediately, in the newsroom, in Sit-in Hall, eventually at my boarding house, as reporters clamored for statements. The next week, news broke. 5 city officials arrested, a mob front unmasked, photographs on front pages across the country. Money came, but more than that, credibility. For the first time, my mother's voice trembled not with judgment, but with something close to pride. Still, I stayed away from Rome. Distance bred confidence. I wanted to return with proof too bright to be doubted, a project that could not be dismissed as a lucky break. Years passed. Awards, book contracts, more exposés, some that rattled the judiciary, some that forced resignations, a few that earned death threats written in childish block letters. I was made columnist at one of Italy's newspapers of record, the compiler of petty notes, the family's fantasist, now dictated the country's breakfast conversation. Yet Rome pulled at me, insistent as unfinished business. Home was no longer home, but an origin I could not shake. It is easy to forgive. It is harder to forget the years of laughter, the crusts thrown at dreams. When I agreed to a local event, A forum trafficado, a public talk at Rome's civic auditorium, my old neighborhood found out. Invitations spread like wildfire, fanned by old grudges and secret hopes. The night before the event, I paced my hotel room, rehearsed lines. This was not an acceptance speech or a press conference. This was return, armored with proof. The October air tasted of stone and exhaust. Piazzale Claudio's trees rattled their last leaves against marble columns. My name blinked from a sandwich board out front. Filippo Banfi, Rome returns, journalism and justice. I recognized faces as soon as I entered the hall. My mother, in a new coat but with the same pinched brow. My uncle, jutting his jaw. Performing bravado before the other men. Rocco and Mario from the factory, now older, leaning harder on their canes. The talk was scheduled for 8 p.m. By 7, the hall was full. My brother stood near the back, taller now, phone camera ready in hand. I sat backstage listening to the hum of anticipation, trying to recognize notes of support from chords of suspicion. The intro was brief. The panelists deferred. As I took the podium, sweat beaded under my collar. But my hands, long used to tremble, remained steady. I began with honesty. "You all know who I am," I said, "and most of you remember how I left." I described the factory, the laughter, my own bitterness. I stand here now not for revenge, but because stories, real, hard-won stories, can change lives. They changed mine. They changed cities. I clicked a remote. The screen behind me filled, not with abstract accolades, but with photographs. Myself in Milan, standing beside the city prosecutor on the courthouse steps. Handwritten letters from families whose apartments I'd fought to save from illegal evictions. News clippings showing mass arrests, heads bowed in shame. The murmurs grew. Uncle Piero pushed forward, squinting. My mother's mouth twisted, complex emotions overtaking certainty. Rocco, thumbs knuckled white, whispered to Mario, "Is that really him?" And then the proof no one could refute. A brief video broadcast live on the national news showing me grilling a cabinet minister about embezzled fire relief funds. The applause that followed was not thunderous, but it carried a new weight. My uncle, stubborn to the last, blurted, "So you finally did it, eh?" Not a question, an old man's last defense. I faced him. Rage prickled beneath my ribs, but restraint softened the edge. I did, because I refused to be who you told me to be. Because truth demanded more. I left it there. Questions rolled in. Students, old colleagues from the neighborhood, even those who used to mock me, asking, with cautious awe, how they might start such work. The hall filled with cautious respect, unsteady but real. Afterwards, my mother approached, her hand trembling as she touched my jacket lapel. "You look tired," she said, then quieter. "You always came home late as a boy, writing even then." Tears sparked in her eyes but did not fall. My brother pulled me into a fierce, awkward hug. "They'll never laugh again," he whispered. On the walk home, the city's stones felt less like weights, more like old companions. Shopkeepers nodded. Rocco clasped my arm. Even my uncle, swallowing pride with difficulty, muttered, "Maybe I read your stories in the paper. Maybe."